A little while ago, I did a video on the top 100 comic runs of all time. And this was taken from a survey from a website, Comic Book Resources. And since then, I've had a viewer ask if I can do a review of the top single issue stories in a comic book. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea. So I went back to Comic Book Resources, and after doing a little bit of digging, I found that they did create a list, a top 50 list of single issue stories, what they call like one-shots or done-in-one stories in a single issue, as well as a top 50 list of graphic novels. Now, in this video, I'm only going to go over the top 50 one-shots or done-in-one issues within a series, and I'd like to do the graphic novel one in a separate video. Now, the difference between the two, the one-shots or the done-in-one issues are typically part of a longer comic book series. So they are just single-issue stories, part of a run, whereas a graphic novel is intentionally published as a single story in one package. This is not my personal list, but I like to look at these compilation lists because often there'll be items in there that I haven't read or come across, which gives me an opportunity to explore these really good comic books. So let's jump right in and take a look at the top 50 single-issue stories, one-shots, or one-and-done within a comic book series. Okay, the first 10 on the list. Now, typically the lower numbers of these type of lists are where I'll find stuff that I haven't come across or that I've read, and there certainly are a number of items in this section that I haven't read. So like the previous list, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick 3 that are my favorite, as well as choose one that I haven't read that I'm maybe most interested in reading, as well as maybe spend some time singling out a particular issue that I find that's interesting or maybe worth talking more about. So perhaps the most surprising comic book for me to see in this 10 would be number 42, which is Judgment Day, which appeared in Weird Fantasy number 18. I'm singling this one in particular because this was originally published in 1952. I wasn't sure if I'd see any single stories from EC here, and this is a particularly good one. It's a hard look at race relations using robots and was really way ahead of its time. The comic books EC published in the 1950s were the best of their time, with really good writing, amazing artwork, and very dense stories. Like this particular story is only 7 pages long. I personally think their war titles were the best, but you could hardly go wrong with any of their other titles. Now, these days, you don't see as many single-issue stories compared to like longer story arcs, and I think one of the reasons why is that it's more difficult to kind of condense a good story in a limited number of pages. If you look at older comic books from before, like especially from the 1960s and before, they were often single-issue stories, or even more so, they often had more than one story in one particular issue. I'm not surprised to see Sandman at number 43 on this list, and as a bit of a spoiler, this is the first of 4 issues that will be on this list. Although I think what surprised me is that number 8, which is the first appearance of Death in Sandman, is not in the top 50, and I really like that issue. Of the particular issues that I like, I would choose Another Cold Morning, Transmetropolitan number 8, as well as Judgment Day, Weird Fantasy number 18, and Wounded Wolf, Uncanny X-Men number 205. Of the ones that I haven't read on this list, I'm most intrigued by, well, there's 2 of them. There's the Batman Ghosts Legends of the Dark Knight Halloween Special, as well as Hitman number 34, because Hitman was on the top 100 list, and I was kind of surprised to see it that high on that list. So I'm kind of curious about this single-issue story. This list doesn't include single-issue stories that are not part of canon. So like I think Elseworld stuff or like imaginary stories as well as what-if stories are not part of this list. However, that being said, if it takes place like in alternate universe, like a complete series like Ultimate Spider-Man, then it will make this list. So in this next part, I've actually read most of these issues. There's one surprise for me on this list, and that's number 36, which is Spider-Man versus Wolverine. Now, if you didn't know, the entire Hobgoblin story was kind of a mess in the 1980s. It's memorable, but they used this kind of single issue as a tie-up of a loose end from that entire Hobgoblin storyline. I thought this issue was pretty good, but, I'm a little surprised to see it this high up on this list. I really enjoyed Brian Bendis and Mark Bagley's run on Ultimate Spider-Man, and number 13 is a great issue where Peter Parker reveals to Mary Jane that he is Spider-Man. And, their conversation about it just feels right, along with how Aunt May thinks they're up to no good when they have this conversation. There are a couple issues in this particular group of 10, and that is number 33, the autobiography of Bruce Wayne in The Brave and Bold, number 197, and Flashing Back, which is Flash number 0. So these are two that I haven't read that I think are worth checking out. What are my top 3 in here? Wow, this would be tough. I really did like that confession story in Ultimate Spider-Man number 13. I think Green Lantern 76, No Evil Shall Escape My Sight. Everyone should read that. And you know what? It's going to be Who is Donna Troy? New Teen Titans number 38, which is a marvelous single issue story about finding out who Donna Troy is, with Robin being as well a major component of that story. But there, number 40, Terror in a Tiny Town, is also amazing for a single issue story by John Byrne, as well as Last Night, another kind of thing, Human Torch story that was in Marvel Fanfare number 15. I highly recommend those two. Okay, the next 10, which is number 30 to number 21. We're getting into the heart of the order, and number 30, which is Silver Surfer number 4, bugs me a little bit because, while it's a great story, I think if you're going to choose a Silver Surfer story out of the Silver Age, it would have to be number 3, where he goes up against basically the devil, which is Mephisto. And for, all intents and purposes, it's kind of a classic, story where the devil, Mephisto, tempts a person, in this case, which is the Silver Surfer. It doesn't have like the physical, I guess, like heavyweight tilt like in number 4 with Thor and the Silver Surfer. But I think, in my opinion, Silver Surfer number 3 is just a better story. Not taking anything away from Silver Surfer number 4 because, obviously it's a classic cover and as well a very good story. Another surprise for me is number 28, which is Master Race, that was originally published in Impact number 1. And if you read this for the first time, you'll probably think, okay, what is the big deal about this story? And I would say that the closest kind of comparison I can make is with the movie Citizen Kane. If you're a film buff, you would probably know that Citizen Kane is widely regarded as one of the best, or if not the best film of all time. And, from a person who, enjoys movies, when I watched Citizen Kane, I thought, okay, what's the big deal about this movie? And what this film brought was a lot of innovation, a lot of new techniques to film, which is, what Orson Welles did. And in this story, Master Race by Krigstein, the artist brought a whole lot of new technique to the comic book medium, to sequential panels. And because of that, this story is highly regarded as one of the most important and influential single stories in a comic book ever made. In fact, you can go on YouTube and do a search and find some other videos about why this particular story is so important for the comic book medium. There are a couple of single issue stories in this part of the list that I haven't read, and one is There's No Hope in Crime Alley from Detective 457, as well as Jack Kirby's single issue story, The Pact, New Gods number 7. I've mentioned before how much of a challenge I've had reading Jack Kirby's Fourth World stuff, but if there is a series that appears to be the one to start with, it would be New Gods. And I think I'm going to give that another try this year. You also have a lot of classic origin stories in these 10 issues. Of course, Fantastic Four number 1, which is the origin of the Fantastic Four, as well as Captain America joins the Avengers with Avengers number 4. More Kirby greatness. If I'm going to choose 3 out of here to really take a look at, Oof. I mean, Master Race Impact number 1 has to be the first one. And you can't go wrong with anything else here. Perhaps a little underrated is the Justice League number 200, which is a league divided. And I really like Uncanny X-Men number 143, which is a single issue story featuring Kitty Pryde. But wow, a lot of good stuff here. I mean, as well, like Batman 251, Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, classic Joker story. So much good stuff with these 10 issues. The next 10, and wow, there's a lot of great stuff here. So I kind of want to go over each one of these and give you my thoughts. Frank Miller completes his first run on Daredevil with an emotional, heavy, and even a depressing story. And the conversation he has with Bullseye is quite something in this issue. At number 19 is Giant Size X-Men number 1, Second Genesis. It's kind of interesting to see this Second Genesis story from Giant Size X-Men number 1 to be so high. I understand because this is the first appearance of the new X-Men, but I think other origin stories like in Fantastic Four number 1 or even the Incredible Hulk number 1 are more memorable. And I wonder if readers do find Giant Size X-Men 1 to be that memorable in terms of the story. Granted, it's a longer story, but I don't find it as memorable as others. Avengers number 58, which is the origin of Vision. I think this is a bit of a cheat because he first appears in 57, and you can say that there's a pretty strong tie-in with that previous issue, but his origin story is pretty well contained in this issue. Wonderful story by Roy Thomas with incredible artwork by John Buscema. Another Sandman entry at number 19. That's good. X Factor number 87. I'm sure I've read this issue, but I just don't recall anything from it. Like, I was collecting pretty much all the X titles, I think, in the early 1990s, but I just don't remember this one in particular. Number 15, Silent Interlude, which is the all-silent issue of G.I. Joe number 21. I've actually never read this, but I'm now curious about the story. Number 14, which is the classic Wally Wood penciled issue where Daredevil fights Submariner in Daredevil number 7. Now, it's a great issue, but for me, I want to say that Tales to Astonish number 100 is kind of a Submariner battle that I remember more fondly. Like, Subby and the Hulk are kind of in, the right weight class, if you can, or power class, if you want to say. Daredevil is really outmatched against the Submariner, but boy, does he put up a fight. It is a great issue. Ramadan, Sandman number 50. You know what? This one does not really ring a bell much, but I'm sure if I go back to it, I'll remember it. And the next two I've actually never read, which is Superman number 141, Return to Krypton, published in 1960, and Hawkeye number 11, Pizza Is My Business, which I do want to check out because I do like dog stories. All right, so if I'm going to pick my top 3 in this one, Roulette would probably be number 1. I really do like that Avengers number 58 story. And you know what? The Daredevil 7 story is pretty amazing, especially for that time. But there are quite a few in this section that I have not read, and I am looking forward to checking them out. The top 10 single-issue stories, one-shots, or done in one. Okay, let's start with number 10. The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, which is a very moving story. Amazing Spider-Man number 248. If you are a Spider-Man fan, I'm sure you are aware of this one. Number 9, What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, which is Action number 775. Now, this was kind of a response story to, titles from Wildstorm at that time. Like, in particular, I think The Authority. I think some people say it's kind of overrated, but You know what? I don't think so. I have it, and I do think it is a very good Superman story. Number 8, which is my favorite Sandman story of all time, and really outstanding. Basically, where Sandman gifts an individual with immortality, and they meet on a regular basis every 100 years. Like, a really wonderful story. I've actually never read number 7, which is The Batman Adventures Mad Love, so I would like to check that out. Number 6, which is Swamp Thing number 21, which is Alan Moore's kind of new origin story of Swamp Thing. And yes, it's a pretty remarkable story where, the origin is really quite outstanding. But, I'm going to say my favorite single story Swamp Thing is actually Annual number 2, where he makes a journey into hell to rescue Abigail. Now, it's kind of linked, I guess, to the Arcane storyline, but stands by itself as well too, and it is a wonderful Swamp Thing story. With great power comes great responsibility. At number 5, Amazing Fantasy 15, yes, the origin of Spider-Man. The Coyote Gospel, Animal Man number 5. It's been a while since I've read this. Why, I don't remember. I'm not sure, but I definitely want to revisit this one again after seeing it on this list. Number 3, This Monster, the best single story issue of Fantastic Four, in my opinion, right after the Galactus Silver Surfer trilogy or 3-issue story arc. Incredible story, and my favorite Fantastic Four story. Number 2 is an interesting one, which is The Nearness of You, Astro City 1/2. And it's a shorter story, which actually focuses on an individual who was affected by basically time shifting, or what happens when people mess around with time. And it's really a heart-wrenching story, but quite amazing. Like, I love Astro City, Kurt Busiek, and I believe Brent Anderson, who did a lot of the artwork, and with amazing covers by Alex Ross. But it's a wonderful series, and definitely worth reading. Check that out. And number 1, for the man who has everything, Superman Annual number 11, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. It's an incredible story because Alan Moore does something amazing. Like, he leans on the popular Superman archetype story from before, which is kind of like the imaginary Superman story. And he brings that into play with quite possibly one of the most evil, despicable villains in Mongol. And it's truly, everything about it is just right. If you haven't read it, I think you're in for a treat. If you're a Superman fan, I'm sure you're well aware of it. And this is before they collaborated on doing The Watchmen, which also makes this very special. But a wonderful story, and well-deserving of number 1, in my opinion. I could maybe make an argument that Fantastic Four number 51 would be my personal choice, but I have no problem with Superman Annual number 11 as being number 1. I want to talk about other issues that would be maybe in my top 50 that are not on this list. And if there's something on your personal list, please make a comment in the comment section below. I would love to hear what other people think about their single issue stories that they hold dear. So if I can mention a few, I want to mention 5. One is Giant Size Man-Thing number 4. I kind of reread this recently, and it's a really incredible story written by Steve Gerber, and it's also a bit autobiographical from what I understand, but he also adds a fair amount of text to kind of supplement the story, which is a diary written by one of the main characters featured in the story. But it is a very, how would I say, emotional story, but it suits Man-Thing very well as well. Definitely worth checking out. Giant Size Man-Thing number 4. Not the Howard the Duck story, but the Man-Thing story itself. I'm a really big fan of Mike Grell's Jon Sable, and there is a single issue story called The Cat. I think it's just a really good self-enclosed story. One of my favorites in that run. Check that out if you're able to. If you like Mike Grell, Jon Sable. As far as Spider-Man stories go, Spectacular Spider-Man, the magazine number 2, is fantastic, which has, I think, the best Green Goblin Spider-Man story, ever made. Now, to be fair, there are probably other Green Goblin Spider-Man stories that I haven't read, but this one to me was pretty special because I had a really beat up copy for a long time and I just read that one to death. But fantastic Spider-Man story that you should check out. I'm a huge fan of Enemy Ace, and I've actually made an episode on this one particular issue, and that's Star Spangled War Stories number 148. And it's a complete book-length story about, Hans von Hammer, and who is a fighter ace in World War I. And it's a really wonderful and sad story as well, too. But definitely up there as one of my favorite stories. And if I look at this list, there's no Doctor Strange. I'm kind of surprised. I would have maybe included a Doctor Strange story in there, but I guess there aren't too many single story or single issue stories of Doctor Strange. But if I would add one, it's Doctor Strange number 55. And it's written by Roger Stern and has wonderful artwork by Michael Golden. It is kind of like a tortured love story for Doctor Strange, but it is an excellent one where he goes up against Despair, a really good villain. Everything about it, the writing and the artwork. Doctor Strange number 55. It is a single issue story. So there you go. The top 50 one-shot or done-in-one stories in comic books of all time. Now, these kind of lists always bring up a lot of good debate and discussion. I'm sure there are a lot of omissions here, as well as a lot of curious choices that made this list. But that's the great thing about these. It's hopefully what it can do is it can, expose some stories or give you an idea of some stories that maybe you haven't read that you may be interested in, as well as, talk about other issues that did not make the list. Now, don't forget, this does not include graphic novels, so you won't see, the heavy hitter one-shot graphic novels like Killing Joke or, The Death of Captain Marvel or other single issue stories like that. I do want to cover that list at some other point in the future, but in the meantime, check out some of these stories. I think they are well worth your time. Thanks for watching. If you want to check out the top 100 comic runs of all time, you can click the link over here. Until next time, read and enjoy your comic books.